Bueno, buenas.
Okay, so good evening. Welcome you all to Fundación Telefónica space. The truth is that it's a great honor to welcome you all here on a new edition of this new cycle Future Image that we develop in collaboration with PHotoESPAña and Pablo Gonzalo. I'm in charge of the culture department at Fundación Telefónica. And well, it's a matter of joy to welcome you all. And it's great to welcome PHotoESPAña, with whom we have a very close relationship since its very first edition. So for many years, this relationship with PHotoESPAña and Fundación Telefónica has been materialized in exhibitions that we have held here. This building that have been really exciting. We've had people like Luis González Palma, Inge Moraz, Antonio Ariza, or one of the last ones that was amazing, by the way, by William Klein. And in the last years, besides this work line, we wanted to go the extra mile, and we wanted to organize these events so that we could have a conversation point among the audience and the most important and relevant voices that take part in the festival. So this is how the cycle was born. That was born last year. This year is our second edition. And at this first meeting of the cycle in 2025, we have the honor and the pleasure to have Ayana V.Jackson with us. Thank you very much for being with us. It's a great honor for us all to welcome you here. I won't speak much longer because Maria will be in charge of introducing her.
Una oportunidad.
But I think it's a great opportunity to talk to her. We were saying that the exhibition that PHotoESPAña has this year is one of the most important ones, and it's her first individual exhibition in Europe. So I think that it is a great opportunity for us all, and we are very grateful to her and PHotoESPAña, Maria, and the whole team. Well, so I was telling you, Ayana is going to talk to Maria Santoyo, and I would like to welcome her too. She is the manager of PHotoESPAña Festival, and we've collaborated with her and regarding the role that PHotoESPAña is having in different projects. And thank you very much for being with us, Maria, and welcome home. This is your house too. And I would like to say thank you to Mercedes Roldan, General Manager of State Museums, that I think she has not been able to make it, and Fernando Saez, that is with us today, the Director of National Museum of Anthropology, that is hosting Ayana's exhibition. I still have not been able to attend. I will do that shortly, but I encourage you all to visit it. Of course, I would like to say thank you to the whole team of Fundación Telefónica. Thanks to Andrés Pérez Perruca, Laura Hernández, Luis Sansegunda, that is always around to make all these events work as a Swiss watch. And without further ado, thank you very much to you all for coming along, and thanks for sharing with us. And I give the floor to the real protagonists. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Pablo.
Thank you very much, Pablo. We were speaking before the chit chat, and every time that I get on the lift, I have some feeling of coming back home. We've collaborated a lot at very exciting projects, and to be able to do this from this new position that I started last year, and to be able to collaborate with the space and with your amazing team, well, it's always a pleasure.
Me sumo a los agradecimientos.
I would like to say thanks to you, of course, and the other people that are involved in having us here together with you all. Of course, thanks to this large audience And we know that Fundación Telefónica makes everything very easy to watch everything on streaming and to watch later. It's great to have you here in person and to take advantage of something that is not replaceable with something that has been mediated by a screen. And this would be the feeling of being next to someone, in this case Ayana V.Jackson, that in my specific case, it is especially exciting to have been talking to her during these days and to understand the concerns, the worries, and the working process of an artist that I've been following for many years. And thanks to her generosity and thanks to her gallery, Mariana Ibrahim, and Marisol, her curator, and thanks to the opportunity that we were given through the Ministry of Culture and the whole area, that I would like to say thank you, of course, and to Fernando, to the National Museum of Anthropology. So everything worked, and this festival that we launched with the opening by Ayana's last week, well, we have a great path in front of us. We have like 103 pictures in total. But it has been quite an amazing start. So thank you, Ayana. And of course, I encourage you all, as Pablo has said, I encourage you all to watch it. Please go and see the exhibition, because despite the shocking images, we will see some of them on the screen, the experience of being in front of them and the experience of being able to wander around the exhibition hall. Well, I think that we've created quite a good atmosphere to present this work in such a time as the 150th anniversary of the National Museum of Anthropology. Well, it's one of the oldest museums in the city. It has much to do with a specific way of thinking and doing, way of thinking that is anchored in the 19th century. And in some way, we're trying to understand this way of thinking, we're trying to review it, and we're trying to redefine, or we're trying to subvert them through our contemporary reality. There's something symbolic in presenting Ayana V.Jackson work in such an environment, at a museum, the past of which is connected to a colonial background. So having said all this, and as a final point, I know that acknowledgements are quite annoying, a little bit annoying. I would like to say thank you to my team, PHotoESPAña team, for being with me and for doing such a good job. And I hope that Ayana and you all feel well assisted, because we really try to do so. So Ayana V.Jackson, as Pablo has said, it is her first individual exhibition in Europe.
No va a ser la última.
It won't be the last. She will be celebrating one in Paris in September. So we have been lucky to be in the middle, so that she could make a pit stop at the festival and at the museum with this first exhibition, that for us means a very important milestone, and especially a collaboration model both with state museums and with the usual audience of our festival and authors and relevant things that we usually present. It's not only something that has been already produced. We can create a conversation, we can create the right environment, we can dynamize it so that artists can create new pieces of work. We can reflect on these spaces. In this case, a meeting with the museum, with other collections of the state museums, like the Museum of America or the collection of the Dress Museum, have been important for Ayana, because the vast majority of all these pieces have not been seen, and they will be seen here for the first time. So it has been really generous by many people involved, and of course I can only be happy, even as a user of the festival, because I'm lucky enough to see this exhibition. It is her first individual exhibition in Europe, but she has a very consolidated career, especially in the US. And basically in the year 2023, if I'm not mistaken, she held a very important exhibition. We will see some of the images later at the African Art Museum at Smithsonian Institute Museums, that unfortunately are being reviewed, but we won't speak about that. Okay, so let's pretend this is not happening, at least today. But it was a magnificent exhibition, and I think that this guaranteed a career that was being increasingly important on a global scale. She is an African American. The correct terminology could be US black. Maybe that would be the best way to express that. She was born in Storinge in New Jersey. But Ayana is a global citizen in real terms, not what is usually said. No, I'm a citizen of the world. No, it's very difficult to see where she is or to know where she is when we talk to her. We don't know if you are in South Africa, if you're in Chicago, if you're in New York, in Paris. You're normally on a plane, right? Well, people that have been born on ships or planes are called now-borns. So I would like to know if Luis helps me and if we can see the presentation that we've brought to start to watch pictures. I'd like to propose a path through your career. Of course, thank you.
Y las gracias, y voy a empezar por esa serie.
And I'll start by the series. It was not the first one in your career, right? But it was the first one when you started to work on a specific way. And it had a deep impact, right, on the international artistic community. This is called Archival Impulse. And we can see one of the pictures here. We can see some more images like this one, for example. This would belong to a previous series, but let's stop at this one. So to get started, Ayana, I would like to ask you, because there are some stories that are going to be very interesting in your subsequent development, right? You started as a documentary photographer. You connected with a specific territory in Latin America, and you wanted to represent where you always wanted to connect with that African diaspora. You wanted to know the traits that you feel related to with other communities that are out of the North American sphere, and you all share this diasporic root in that regional Africa.
Un poco sobre el origen de este trabajo.
Tell me a little bit about the origin of this question. And in some way, you start with a specific practice that would be the self-representation, right? And well, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, first of all. Thank you, Maria. And I also want to thank the PHotoESPAña team, the Museum of Anthropology, the Ministry of Culture for inviting me and for having me here. I also want to thank our host, Fundación Telefónica, and my friends, and all of you who are here today with us. We've said that we are going to speak in our own language, but I just wanted to say a few words, give you my greetings in Spanish, but I'll move to English now.
Yes. Archival Impulse was probably the first exploration that where I truly had true intentionality in the use of my body. As you mentioned, I worked for quite a few years in the documentary space, in the photojournalism space. But when I started to put myself in front of the camera, it was because I reached as Rashid Johnson says, at some point the medium or some point the way of working, you exhaust yourself. The paint is no longer enough. The type of working is no longer enough, and the subject matter calls for a different approach or a different tool. And at a certain point, I wanted to to express something that was coming from inside. And I realized that if I were to actually use other people's bodies, I was going to stumble into issues of representation that would have been difficult and problematic for me. Archival Impulse is not the very first time that I step in front of the camera. However, it was the time that I realized that I needed to continue to use my own body. And the reason I say that is because in the decision to work with the archive, a very difficult archive, a photographic archive, which is, I originally was working out of the Duncan Cronin archive in South Africa, but I later started working with different other things that I was coming across, Santo Mofokeng's Black Photo Album. I was also thinking about my own family photographs, and then at a certain point, the Arthur Walter collection created some work that I decided to recreate because I wanted to draw attention to the tension between the tension of seduction and repulsion when it comes to some of these images. So I felt that one of the things that was most difficult about the archive, or those images that were staged in the many of them were staged in the first half century of photography. The first thing that I realized was that many of the subjects seemed very, not so much uncomfortable always, sometimes uncomfortable, but more so they weren't fully engaged. So I assumed that it had something to do with the new technology, if they're photographing in certain regions where maybe this massive apparatus, because of course at that time it was a very different type of photography, right? If you think about late 19th century photography. So there's this kind of strange look in their eyes sometimes, and that's before you even get to the problematics of the composition and the point of view. But when I finally did get to the point of view of the photographers and what was being done with these photographs, I realized that there's something that can be triggering in the process of trying to address this archive as a black woman, because the images themselves were triggering to me. So the thought to recreate them, I immediately realized that if I used another black woman's body, I would run the risk of triggering something, because there's so much complexity to what is being said about who we are and our position in the world through these images that even the most professional of models might have trouble with. So I realized that the risk of taking on this imagery was so great that I would rather absorb the trauma myself than run the risk of traumatizing another person.
Mm-hmm. Esta es una serie donde se
So this is a series where at a specific point of time you settle very important things. These are decision-making processes that are important related to photography, because in this case many complex narratives are being mixed. On the one hand, we have the control of the photographer on his or her self-portraited. In many archives where these pictures start from are complex and historical archives combined with or linked to our colonial past, where being archives that have been created at the end of the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, they have special archetypes. So the wild archetype, for example, these wild people that are usually posing as exotic elements at an exotic landscape, or sometimes they are posing together with those missionaries, or that white men that in some way is going to free them from that wildness or is going to civilize them. These are the stereotypes that we have among all these archives, and the series Archival Impulse, the title of which comes from quote by Hart Fosker that encourages us to confront with the archives and with the past so that we can build new ways of thinking. In some ways, these archives are not just something that we should feel embarrassed about, but also documentary material. that we can use in order to make contemporary society to see from today and to confront with these realities, thanks to such powerful work as Ayana's, where there are some decision makings that will apart from having specific pictures that you deep dive in, and that difficult confrontation for you or for the condition that you represent. And then we have the reincarnation of these figures, in some sense as kind of brotherhood with the figures that were not personal at all. They were not person with name and surnames. They were just wild examples or examples of wildness. And to reincarnate and re-articulate these stereotypes, but from a body empowerment, this is what we're going to see, that she does through more performance strategies, like creating these atemporary backgrounds where there are some quotes to the original archive, but they recreate with this color and black and white combination. So these are creative decision-making processes, but they are all based on a deep reflection. And I would like to connect with this cycle, a future image that we launched last year here at Fundación Telefónica, that allows us, that besides all the celebration, etc., allows us to sit down, allows us to think and to chit-chat. This first session that is called Afrofuturism, that is a complex term, a complex that will, we were able to have a conversation thanks to which it speaks about a current that is not very well known in Europe that connects with sci-fi, but it has a lot to do with this picture, because it seems that this picture can be a countersense from this point of view of Afrofuturism. But what happens when a specific community, in this case the black community, a diasporic community, erratic community and dispersed community all around the world, what happens when these community has no audiovisual role model in their past other than violent or submission images? How to build a conception of the future, either sci-fi or even a role model in present time for all of us, but specifically for people that share this condition, that goes far away from these parameters that have been set through documentation. This is where Afrofuturism comes out, plays a role. And it has to do with that series that you exposed at the Museum of African Art in Washington. I think that we have some pictures here, very specific ones. I'm going to stop that for a few seconds.
Y esta ya es anterior, entonces te voy a dejar con esta simplemente para preguntarte por esa.
So, according to this image, I would like to ask you about this exhibition. This is not at the exhibition at the Museum of Anthropology, but please tell us a little bit what this exhibition was about, what stories you settled, and why is the only one that you consider that could connect with that idea of Afrofuturism or some kind of magic realism based on mythical terms. Tell us.
Well, I guess typically when I create a new body of work, it's connected to the prior body of work. And although this is archive, there are several bodies of work in between Archival Impulse and From the Deep in the Wake of Drexciya. What I'll say is this, to the subject of trauma in the previous body of work and the decision to rather absorb it myself, what I realized is that for several years I was embodying very problematic and difficult imagery, both for myself but also in general in terms of the histories and the times and the points of view that it reflected. So there's nearly 10 years, maybe a little more than 10 years between Poverty Pornography and Archival Impulse, and From the Deep. But at the time that I started doing From the Deep, I remember genuinely needing to imagine something else, something positive. I wanted to lend my body towards a different narrative. I wanted to truly, it begins a little bit with a series called Intimate Justice in the Stolen Moment, where I began to move into images that I myself found positive from the family archive. Because just the last thing I'll say about the previous body of work is that during Archival Impulse, while the 70 or 80% of those works are dealing with problematic imageries and points of view, I eventually started, as I mentioned, to think about the Black Photo Album, the project of Santa Mofokeng, which made me remember that if I'm looking at photographs of the human zoos from the World's Fair, or if I'm looking at late 19th, early 20th century photography of these kind of semi-nude bodies, these kind of primitive, as objects of the presentation of the primitive African body, I realized at a certain point I must have come across a photograph, and I'm getting to this, but I must have come towards a photograph that was dated in 1881, which was the founding of my alma mater, Spelman College, and then it made me realize that there were these Victorian subjects, which reminded me of photographs that I had in my family home. So suddenly I was able to move into imagery that I felt dignified in, but these were not in the public imaginary, so I still had to deal with the archive, both negative and possible, the public image of the black body in the 19th century, and then the private image that existed predominantly in our homes. But either way, I'm dealing with that tension of the gaze, and I really physically wanted something else. And so when I had the opportunity to explore Drexciya, I think it made me want to spend time in kind of speculative fiction, right, and speculation. As we mentioned when we spoke, I don't, and it's not so much that I don't believe that this work can exist in the context of Afrofuturism, but I can say that, I'm here with a scholar, Ingrid Lafleur, who's a major scholar of Afrofuturism, and my sister and best friend, and I think it's undeniable that Drexciya, because of who Drexciya the band was, is part of the canon of Afrofuturism. It's one of the main ones, but I don't know that I necessarily set out to create or to become an Afrofuturist through this work. But I will say that what I did, because it's such a complex culture, it's such a complex movement, it's got so much scholarship, it's super dense. But what I can say is that with this project, I was trying to satisfy, as usual, a need for myself, and I understood, while in the context of making this work, why those early why the canon of artists that ultimately became understood as Afrofuturists emerged, because there was that need to imagine a different future, to change, to do the work of changing something in the past in order to find comfort where you are, and to truly do the work of imagining a new future by changing something in the past, and for me, I physically also needed to do that by stepping away from this physical, living, breathing, complicated archive, and moving into something that was more speculative, where I had room to grow.
Yo creo que en esta imagen podemos ver bien eso a lo que aludes, ¿no?
I think that we can see this very properly. This dignifying images that respond to representation, Western archetypes that have to do with established power. Here we can recognize, it connects us with Elizabeth portraits or high society portraits, and suddenly a gesture that is simple, like, for example, to appropriate those attributes or those iconographies and to present yourself in front of the audience with a stare and with the body language and the expression that is quite particular, and we'll see where it comes from, by the way. But the fun thing is that we suddenly find a figure that provokes us in some way, that we consider that it could not exist, that it scolds us, and you prove that they could have existed not only in mythological terms, but also in your subsequent research, you found these rests of that presence of black bodies on the archives, especially black women. This happens right now with women in general. They were starting to find a woman presence in the archives. But that stare, well, we're not reinventing anything. It has to do with identifying specific figures that have been relegated by history, that have been forgotten in the archives. How do you tackle that research work? For you, that's very important, right? What's your process in that sense?
As an activist, as an artist activist. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, I come from a long line of teachers. And you know, my great grandmother, although she was born free, she was a child of people that had not been free, but she was able, Katie Clark, to at some point attend a normal school, and then my grandfather became a teacher, and then the first principal, and then my father, and then going out to all the uncles. So my cousin and I rejected becoming teachers, but in a way it's our family business. There's many family businesses, but one of them is teaching. So I one day looked up and I maybe gave a lecture, and I never talked about the art, and then I realized, oh wow, I ended up being a teacher at the anyway. But I think the thing is that, as I was saying yesterday during the walkabout in the exhibition space, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done for us to find our mutual dignity. I think the architecture and the architecture of supremacy in general, whether it's gender, whether it's racial or otherwise, or nationhood, nationality, there's an architecture and an architect to all aspects of some supremacist logic, supremacist thinking. So as a descendant of victims of the architecture of racism as well as sexism, but I'm more speak from the standpoint of racism. When I started to understand that this is that there is design, and there's a set of political powers and decisions to subjugate my body historically and even perhaps now, then I realized if at some point we can all agree that it's a fiction, that it's an architecture, it's a structure, and it's been built, then we can begin the process of dismantling it and finding a new way of relating with each other across all of the isms, all of the identity spaces, right? So I would love to say that, well, I did fall in love with photography. I'm a child of a divorce. It's something that my father and my grandmother taught me to do. I would love to say that I'm a true photo bro. You know what I mean? But I'm not. I'm actually more of a teacher. I'm just not as good of a academic writer as I feel I would need to be to truly express what I think needs to be expressed. So photography, just if you'll indulge me 2 more seconds, the exhibition that I'm sure we'll get to here at the Museo de Antropología, it's the beginning of it is this series I did on Afro-Mexicans, where I took photos, documentary work. But what's important the reason I mentioned that in this juncture of the conversation is because it was really when I did the first exhibition in a cultural center where we exhibited the portraits, and people who came to the exhibition saw actual black bodies from Mexico. I, in real time, saw people just all of a sudden, like, their whole worldview changed, right? It's like, it's one thing to read that there are people of African descent in Mexico. It's another thing to see it. You know, it's one thing to imagine it, to intellectualize it. It's another thing to actually kind of be faced with the visual representation of it. And that's when I realized the true power of photography. For all of its good and its evils, it has the immediacy of the technology. It has the capacity to take things far and bring them near at an increasingly more rapid speed. So I think I realized that was going to be, I slowly but surely and consistently realized that would be the tool that I would use to try to deconstruct some of these ideas and lead people to revisit how they see imagery and to be literate in it and understand it as even the photograph itself as a construction, right? So, but if I can say there is a role that photography played in the construction of race and gender stereotypes, then you can begin to look at it critically, but you're also acknowledging that it happened.
Claro. En cierto sentido también te estás apropiando.
In some sense, you would be taking the tool from a different point of view, right? And at the same time, not, because as far as photography is a tool that, as you've said, is used to legitimate stereotypes and to spread ideas that are not always positive, and they can be really negative, really evil. In that exercise of this appropriation, it's funny that you said photo abroad. The truth is that photography is a means of expression that is highly patriarchal. Magnum Photos agency, for example, that we collaborate with, has started to have women members among in its community. And I remember that I was there the 50th anniversary. It was a family picture, and the only one that picture was Cristina Garcia Rodero. There were many people at the agency. Many women had passed away, Ivarno, Ingemora, but there were not many women there. Just for you to know up to what extent photography is a means that is highly connected to that seduction capacity, that patriarchal power, the photo reporter, these impositive and phallic cameras, this trendy photographer.
La cámara le dota prácticamente de una capacidad de seducción.
That the camera gives like this seduction capacity immediately. We've all been raised with these narratives. For example, the top models from the 90s had a lot to do with that kind of violent structures or hegemonic structures, and I'm really interested in this appropriation of a tool like this one, not from an experimental point of view in terms of format. Ayana V.Jackson is not subverting the photography gender. These are portraits. We could even say that these have this classic atmosphere, so this kind of classicism among the images, but the gesture, the expression, just having these possible historical models, sometimes that are original, you're embodying figures that have existed, or retrofuturistic, or more speculative. I mean, using this capacity that photography has to generate this power transmission is very immediate, right?
Comentabas, luego vamos a ver las imágenes de la serie de México que...
We'll see the pictures of the series in Mexico that we were talking about, and now we get into one of the series that has been specifically created for the National Museum of Anthropology. I think it will be better that you speak about that meeting. In order to be able to prepare this project, we had the happy idea, and we were lucky enough to talk to you between flights, because you were going to stay in Europe for a few days, and we were able to invite you to come, for you to know the museum, for you to meet Fernando and the rest of the team, for you to deep dive into their collections. State museums, as happens with the vast majority of Western museums, under criteria that have been set up by the ECOM, are starting colonization processes. And it starts from a good knowledge of the collections that they hold, and they're just resettling their mechanisms or their education structures in front of the visitors that they receive. And from that point of view, Fernando showed the collections that are held by the National Museum that are very interesting. We went to the Museum of America, where she was able to see things like cast paintings that are really disturbing right now. And this confrontation happened as a miracle, because when it was the first time you came to Spain and we showed cased paintings, it's like deploying something that happened in the past, but it created a very interesting conversation.
Del museo se llama Noscete Ipsum.
So the project is called Noscete Ipsum, Know Yourself. This is the motto that appears on the architrave. It appears on the Society of Anthropology of Paris, and Membrum Phantasmum would be like the undertitle. So this is one of the images of Noscete Ipsum, of this project, Know Yourself. I would like you to tell me, or to tell the audience, when you decided to work with the museum, with the motto, the collection that you had seen, how everything was in your mind so that you could produce the series in such a short period of time. I have a few images too. I'm not doing spoilers, so you go to see the exhibition, okay?
The festival and the exhibition benefited quite a bit from the fact that I'm very process oriented as an artist. So luckily we were a perfect match in terms of of course, at the highest level, your trust in such a magnificent and so much work went into that exhibition, to trust almost so many works, so much sight unseen. I think it dawned on me very late that somehow I held in my hands a bit of the image of the 150th anniversary. I don't know that it's not so much that I didn't know, because everyone told me that that's what was happening, but it's more that I think my brain hadn't, the gravity of that, of the charge wasn't apparent in the beginning. So, excuse me. It wasn't apparent in the beginning, because I was so excited by where I was in the work for myself. And while we were originally considering something more along the lines of a somewhat not retrospective, but like a kind of a survey exhibition, and we were emailing and talking, and I'm like in Mexico, having a conversation about all of this, and I'm like, it's too bad we're not showing this. And I think I slowly but surely kind of like pushed the agenda until you guys, I think you submitted to like the sight unseen of it all. But at the same time, I know, Maria, in many ways, you expressed that this would be amazing. It's just, do you have the time? And you wanted to respect my time, and not rush my process. So I do appreciate that. But that's really how it came. And then I guess what I'll say about it is that it is about a bit seizing the moment. I think things we didn't foresee happened in the time that we were putting this together, and I think that truly the work needed to come, and it needed to come in this moment, and so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I couldn't think in the end of a more appropriate kind of conversation, dialogue to have with Spain, and with photography.
Este trabajo Noscete Ipsum, por un lado.
This work, Noscete Ipsum, in some way is working through an archetype that is the mirror, the one that we are seeing here, in that idea of getting to know yourself and that connection with the mirror therapy that is known, there is a game where you are interrogating your identity, and at the same time you are inviting us know ourselves, to try to recognize ourselves, and at the same time it's an invitation to the Museum of Anthropology, like that mirror, that more than a mirror, it was an image that said, well, this is knowledge, this is how we rank it, this is how we taxonomize it, and this is how I'm going to illuminate you all from the this light of knowledge. And what happens when, instead of projecting light, the museum receives the light and it has to be reflected inside?
Actualización de cualquier museo.
This is an update process of every museum. They shouldn't want society to subdue to its ways of thinking and to illustrate through these codes, or to generate that relationship. It should be a reflection of the demands by society. So these mirror games, well, you mentioned that you were in Mexico when we got in touch with you. You have been working there for many years and at different series, and these images that have been produced for the exhibition, well, we see another one here. Here you're embodying a figure that has to do with very specific rituals of the coast of Oaxaca in Mexico. The dance of devils. It's a ritual that is connected with that African half-breed past that has to do with slavery. So that's the question. You are working with Mexico, trying to recognize yourself in these population, in the half-breed populations, and there was a shock with the collections here. Only those case paintings, or that representation of blackness or half-breeding in our codes. Please tell us a bit about that reflection, that reaction. What's the result of this process?
For just one or two sentences of background, when I first went to Oaxaca and Guerrero, to the Costa Chica, by that point I had already, in 2002 or 3 for the first time, for the documentary work, I myself had only read about the community, and when I came, I started going to this event called El Encuentro de los Pueblos Negros, the meeting of the black towns, and this was a kind of a community day, community festival that had by then been in an annual festival for some years. And like I remember, maybe I went 2 or 3 times with my former collaborator Marco Villalobos, and I think one of them was the 10th anniversary. And each time there were several things that they would show to as the cultural kind of, like, what's the word I want to use, a cultural expression of the African descendant community that was for them, specific to them. And so, of course, music, son artesa, son jarocho, the tarima, all of the kind of ways of the relationship of the tarima to the drum and the lack of the drums. So there are certain aspects of things that are culturally Mexican that they identify as coming specifically from the African kind of presence. So, for instance, because the drum was banned, the percussive way of dealing with music was with your feet. So they would, like this, which eventually there's so many roots to flamenco, but the way that they articulate it in son artesa and son arrocho, when the dancers are the percussion is always with the feet, a lot of that has a relationship to the experience of the enslaved people in the area. So I say all that to say that there was many things called my attention in the time, but the Danza de los Diablos, I think, was, I guess, the one I felt I wanted to explore 20 years later with my own body, because because now, like then, I thought it was interesting that there was this plantation scenario, slave plantation scenario that persisted as one of the main cultural dances of the community. Now, masquerade dance you see everywhere. There's so many for the Mixteca, you know, in that community. There's lots of masquerade, but this one is, I thought this was interesting because it's a dance of the Diablos are the black slaves, and then you have the Capitas, you have the overseer, who's also black, interestingly enough, and then you have La Minga, who's a Spanish woman who's flirting with and, you know, chasing after the overseer. And I thought that was interesting, but then when I would ask, and it's not to say that the scholarship hasn't been done, but to this date I haven't been able to truly understand the origin of the mask itself. But if you were to ask in my field research, you know, what's the origin of the mask, your everyday person excuse me, will say that it's an African mask, and I'm like, but where in Africa? And then the questions get less clear, answers get less clear. And so, you know, but I found it interesting. So anyways, what can I say? I'll hopefully someone will ask me a question that's more, if someone's curious more about the process of the garments and everything, but basically that's the reason, that's the backstory of why I chose to engage with this. And you'll see the other works in the exhibition where the skirt and all of that is a result of a collaboration with Mexican designer Carla Fernandez Casa de Moda, and together it was a true collaboration. However, the thing that I really wanted was to make a garment that not only brought the opportunity to have a conversation about the Danza de los Diablos, but also to create a garment that encapsulated in a discursive way all of the tenets of their identity, from the indigenous to the Spanish to the African.
Estoy intentando pasar la imagen, pero no me responde.
I'm trying to move to the next picture, but the PDF is not responding. I don't know. Please.
Ahora. Bueno, este es un retrato basado en el espejo.
This mirror based on this mirror-based portrait.
Y aquí vemos.
And here we can see that double play between the mirror as a reflection or the mirror as a shooter, something that has been used to point or to create far away signals to someone that could identify you. It was important for you, right, throughout this process. And regarding what you were saying, up to what extent it is important, we see a work that on the one hand has to do with embodiment. It's not only a self-representation or a self-portrait. We're not speaking of self-portrait in this case. There's an exercise that has connections with drama, connections with performance, and a high degree of knowledge of your body.
Al mismo tiempo, todos esos elementos que para ti son importantes.
And at the same time, the elements that are important for you. You were speaking about that skirt made by a fashion designer that you've collaborated with, and we see all these attributes and this representation. Tell us a little bit about your decision-making process in terms of the kilt or the knife that you are wearing. Just to put a couple of examples about the shawl that you're wearing.
Connected to, I know we're moving to the garment and the objects, but connected to the mirror, what I'd like to say is that for me, I was very, very conscious of the insider-outsider positionality that I had, and the challenge that was presented with embodying this subject matter. And I tried to be careful not to, or to really be very diligent in that line between appropriation and performance and conversation, dialogue, appreciation. So as I was, I began, before I speak about the machete and the quilt, one thing that I always like to mention is that I left my jewelry on, my private jewelry on, in a lot of these images, something that I really have never done in previous bodies of work. Because in previous bodies of work, I was definitely exploring the black body, where it's about the black African body, the black American body, and I was definitely embodying, especially when I was in dialogue with the archive, I was definitely embodying another person. Well, the reference was, but it wasn't the same thing as going to these communities and trying to have a conversation about Black Afro-Mexican identity or Afro-Mestizo culture, with a living, breathing cultural people, right? It's like, so as Susan Sontag, there's so much scholarship and theory around just that, right? So I left a lot of traces of my physical self and my physical subjectivity. It's intentional because while in a lot of other bodies of work, I use my body sometimes, even in this one, but it's slightly different, in order to become invisible, in order to eventually direct the gaze towards what are the other discursive elements in the photograph. So eventually one would realize that it's always the same face, so then you start thinking about everything else. But in this one, I was very careful not to be seen to be becoming a Mexican woman. So the bracelets are from South Africa, the earrings are random from West Africa. And then the necklace is the necklace I wear every day in this case, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention in terms of how one can read it. And so, because if an anthropologist, for instance, were to attempt to, in 100 years, read this, they're going to say, but that's not beadwork, that's customary, that's from Africa, and not even West Africa, is from South Africa, right? And there's a lot of things that make it's intentionally untrue, it's intentionally unfaithful to who a Black Mexican woman from the Costa Chica is. But the second thing I'll mention is, but the quilt itself is a collaboration with Carla Fernandez, but also with the women of Los Pocitos, which is a community in the near Pinotepa Nacional. Many of you may know the song "Que viva la costa con Pinotepa." So me gusta tus mujeres, this song. So, but la costa con Pinotepa is the Costa Chica, and that song is speaking about Black women essentially. So, anyways, this community in Los Pocitos, we worked together to create a quilt, and it was really interesting because obviously there is the history of the rebozo all throughout Mexico and other places, but and of course the blanket, and there can be patchwork in a blanket. But when I asked, and I still haven't really found the word for quilt, it wasn't the easiest thing to communicate what I wanted to do with it. So if one gets an opportunity to look at it closer, you'll see that you'll notice that it's patchwork, right? So it's different pieces of textile. Some of the textiles are very clear. They're all industrial, not all, but they're mostly industrial. So even though you have rebozo and the true weaving, there's a few patches that are really woven, but there's also, most of them are like machine-made industrial rebozo prints next to Dutch wax industrial versions of West African prints. So there's that, and it's an opportunity to have a conversation about that trade. But anyway, then at the bottom you'll see there's this line work at the bottom, and it's ribbons. When you see, if one has the opportunity to see it, it's in person. That style of ribbon work is Mixteca. It's from the indigenous community that is in the region. So many of the Afro-mestizas y mestizos are mixed with Mixteca. There are other cultures, obviously, but there's a strong Mixteca line that runs through that community. Mm-hmm. And then these white patches, you'll notice, have different symbols on them. And unfortunately, both of the images we selected are from the same point of view, but one you'll see in the video if you have an opportunity of how it is from behind. But basically what we did was we assigned the women. There's a community of embroiderers, black women, Afro-Mestiza embroiderers in the community, and Carla Fernandez, who is true to the idea of preserving indigenous knowledge systems and engaging in indigenous kind of ways of working in fashion.
Estás hablando en realidad de una serie de
You speak about a series of strategies that you share with a whole trend of contemporary artists that are looking for things that have to do with the identity or the roots of the shared identity. In the case of visual artists, black artists, this condition of blackness and everything that it entails, it's curious to see how syncretism, this mixture that you are speaking about, not only in hybridation of the piece of work where we have textile work, there's a community thing here, because they've shared the creation process with other people, how you choose attributes from different origins that together could not belong to a specific culture, and it has a lot to do with that feeling of diaspora. So just for them to see a few more images before wrapping up, you see these garments that connect with a cultural ritualization, with the mystic that is created around these subdued population through slavery, and in the end they were banned. Christianism banned those spiritual manifestations, and here you vindicate that. And I'm going to get into the last point that I would like to talk to you about, because on the one hand we have portraits where we have very specific static that there are things that have a lot to do with Velázquez. We live with the Prado Museum with this archetype of the Baroque portrait or Renaissance portrait or Western portrait, with that static position with posings that are very much straightforward, and to break that static with movement in your case, that is very important in your work. This is the series that you were talking about a minute ago. You forgot to see me coming, a series that was developed in Texas. We see your moving body, and to break with that statism of the photography, to start playing. And the last point, so that we don't run out of time, that I would like to ask you about is your own body process, and how you evoke that movement. It means that theoretical is static, like photography.
Well, without telling the whole story, just for time's sake, the first time I started what I considered to be these movement studies was in an earlier body of work called a work called Wild as the Wind. And what happened truly is, as I said earlier, I was beginning, after working in a certain kind of way with a certain subject matter that's so close to my own subjectivity in terms of the archival images, without being overly dramatic, I realized, as I said, I knew that I was absorbing certain kinds of trauma. So what truly happened was that there was we're living in interesting times. So I was in Paris. There was a grand jury that came back, and where a man had been murdered and his assassins were acquitted. And I was just like, it just took me into so many. It was almost like, that's the beauty of even though I don't consider myself necessarily an Afrofuturist, the beauty of Afrofuturist thinking is that it is a collapsing of time. And in that moment, it's expansion and collapsing of time. So in that moment, like, I'm sitting in this Victorian outfit, posing in this beautiful way, and thinking about who she is as a black woman in that time, because there were black women, black Victorians at that time, and that there were lynchings all around her. And now I'm sitting literally in the age of rampant lynching in my own country. And I couldn't concentrate I couldn't be present for that character. So I'd always wanted, so I needed something else. I needed to move my body. I just needed another. So it was really a selfish, personal response that made me start with this. But of course, I think about the history of photography, so I'm very interested in Etienne Jules Marais and Edward Muybridge, right? And so it's funny, I come back to the horses because I was super fascinated by those Muybridge and Marais images where they were trying to figure out whether it's an animal that takes flight or is terrestrial, right? And they figured out these stop motion, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I can have her moving and I can create like a movement study, and it still works with the subject matter. She's still in the garment. But what ended up happening was there was this one frame that was just like, pow, wow, why? She was like midair. She was strong. Yet she felt like she was fleeing and also running away from and running towards something at the same time. It was so perfect. So that when the next body of work came around, I started to do it intentionally, which is how the previous image came about. It's a series within the series of all my bodies of work. So wherever possible, I attempt to have at least one or two images that are kind of in similar flight. But and so for these, it was similar. And so then I started to play with different characters presenting as one body. So when when I have the opportunity to influence the curation, I want them the same size, the same location, and in order to feel like they are part of a similar study. It's a very intentional in conversation with Murray and Muybridge.
Es un estudio cronofotográfico, ¿no? Que es como se llamaban los estudios de...
It's a chronophotographical study. We usually call Muybridge and Murray studies, and you'll see that in the room when you see that those equestrian portraits. It has a lot to do with power representation and royalness. This is quite catching to see these women from different times, black women that correspond to specific people in history that didn't have the privilege of being represented in such a way where it's not only equestrian portraits, but they're also in action. In that you forgot to see me coming, in some way, there's a mention to that attack or that defense. It's a representation in action of a past that has been very much oppressed and that couldn't deploy that action in the fight for free. Day before yesterday, we had the chance of participating in a different project related to this. You said something that really touched my heart, because I told you, when you do this work and you see yourself represented, do you feel empowered? And I loved your answer. You said that your power was the privilege of having freedom of movements. I would like you to elaborate a little bit on that, because I think it's a very beautiful story, and maybe we can all resonate with that, just to wrap up, to share that with our audience.
when you mentioned earlier in the introduction that I identify and am a global citizen, I agree, and I do identify as a global citizen. But because I'm very aware of my privilege, right? So there's a kind of double consciousness that I experience. Like the Black U.S. American body in the 21st century is a very complicated body, right? We're at once there's a significant tension there, right? Because you're at once aware that you're among the few people, because of the powers that be, that have such freedom of movement, right? So my privilege as a U.S. American and my privilege as a middle-class educated person, woman, my privilege to be raised in the era of affirmative action and DEI, as they say, all of those things collapse together to make me among the more privileged people at the moment by the intersection of my moment in time as a Black woman in the United States, etc. But at the same time, I'm exposed to, I'm disoriented because of the issues of race and gender that are constantly at play and are still under attack, not only in my own country, but in other parts of the world. So I exist in this kind of strange tension between the two. But as a soul, as a being, I do believe that our humanity can make space for freedom of movement, to make the borders less high, to find new approaches to engage with each other across cultures, across countries, across economies. I think there's a new way. There is a way out there for us, and I may not see it, or we may not see it in our lifetime, but there is another way for us to engage without these borders being so high. So the movement is both for me and as a gesture, as a provocation, to this realization that we're not stuck. We don't have to stay stuck in this point of view, this structural point of view. And yes, a museum like the Museum of Anthropology made sense at a certain time, and colonial logic to someone made sense at a certain time. But and it's fine. We can, in my opinion, make peace with what was not foreseen to be so destructive at the time, but acknowledge it, look at it, turn it around, which is of course what is being done in this moment, but also with photography, because there's a lot of work around the archive right now. So there's this really important work that's being done to acknowledge and address and revisit and try to use the benefit of that repositioning to help us to construct a better future for our children, right? And to make things a little less scary for those of us, those people in the world who are embodying, who are entities inhabiting bodies that are at peril in this moment. Right, so we owe it to ourselves and as humans, and to really kind of search deeply in our humanity, to really truly think about our actual true family, which is the human family, and the planet and all of these things. But it's really about our humanity. Our humanity is at stake. It's not our wealth. It's not our it's not our wealth. It's not our nation state. It's not it's our actual humanity that's at peril. And if we don't begin to find those and extract those things that are keeping us far and keeping us in a moment, and as you mentioned, in a logic that no longer, if it ever served us, that no longer serves us, we owe it to ourselves and our humanity, our future, and our children, to root that evil, and forgive ourselves and give grace to those who we may have trespassed against.
Bueno, yo creo que es una excelente manera de terminar.
Well, I think it's a great way to wrap up this conversation. Something else that happened yesterday and during these days that we've been working and reflecting and creating conversations around your work is that, well, she has collaborated with us in this project, Afrospace, with Jason Garcia, that has written one of the texts of the exhibition that will be able to fund this publication that will be available at the museum that has still been received. It still smells ink. So Jason and Afrospace, well, the truth is that it's being quite a lesson for all of us. I'm meeting people and I'm knowing, discovering great points of view, but they have a cup that says the future is Afro. So I don't know if the future is Afro, but anyway, the future is to recognize that Afro exists and there are other topics, and the future is to have a look at it, to recognize and to build. So with these ideas, thank you very much for coming along. Thank you to Jana. It has been great to listen to you, and see you all. Thank you. Cheers. Well, and of course, thanks to our hosts, and thanks for your patience. We have run a little bit late. Maybe you can ask Jana if you want in private not to make the show longer. Thank you.